Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the book launch of the Cricket Sports Medicine book published by Springer. We are very grateful to have all of you here with us today, and thank you for the time that you've taken on this Friday. In some time zones, you may be watching from the pub because it's already late. Others will be very early in the morning, and India would just have finished their workday. So we really appreciate the time that you've taken out to be here. John and I really made sure that it's not the two of us speaking, because it's definitely not a project just invented and put together by the two of us. It was a collective project that involved so many other contributors to this, and we wanted this program to really reflect that. I'm Benita Olivier. I'm a professor at Oxford Brookes University and one of the co-editors. My cricket research journey started in 2010. I'm a physiotherapist, and I desperately were looking for a topic for my PhD project. And I was looking for a sports movement that happens very fast, sometimes slightly out of control, asymmetrical, and what better action is there than the fast bowling action? And that's how it all started, how I got involved in the whole cricket scene, and I completed my PhD in cricket fast bowling, and one thing led to another. And here we are 15 years later, and we have the book Cricket Sports Medicine. Now, you now know something about me, and I'm going to hand over to John just to say a few words about him and his affiliations and how he got involved in cricket. We're going to hear lots more about him in a few minutes, where he's going to give us a presentation. But for now, he's our co-editor, and I would love you to also meet him online. Over to you, John.
Yeah, hi, Benita. Thanks very much for the intro. Give me the thumbs up that you can hear me, if that's okay. Excellent. I don't know whether I should talk too much about myself, but about more the book itself. I mean, I think, like Benita, this book has had so many contributors, and what I'd like to think is not only the people who have written chapters for the book, but just those who have contributed to the cricket sports medicine group over the years. So there was a thin thread of conferences that we've had every Men's World Cup, every 50-year World Cup. We've had a conference at in the country that's hosted the World Cup, and that's really how this group has emerged over the years. And the conferences have got bigger and better each time they've been on. And in fact, this book came out of the most recent one was in India, and we all met at a conference in Chandigarh. So a special shout out to Mandeep Dhillon, who put on a fantastic conference there. But this book certainly would not have occurred if Mandeep had not put on such a great conference in Chandigarh. And I was lucky to get to that conference because I was ridiculously busy in that month, November of 2023. I had 3 trips in about 2.5 weeks, and I was in a totally out of control schedule. And I can't even remember Benita asking me. We're at the conference, and Benita had been talking to Raman about Springer commissioning a book for cricket sports medicine, and Benita was really keen, and her one stipulation is I have to have a co-author. I can't do it all myself. I've got to have a co-author. And I can't even remember her asking me, but I think I knocked her back because I was about to fly back from India to Sydney and then spend 12 hours in Sydney, then fly to New Zealand for another conference, and then fly to Melbourne after I got back to, and I was just like, are you out of your mind? I'm way too busy. I can't have any involvement in this whatsoever. And I think Benita probably asked about 10 other people, and everyone said the same thing. And then it was just a sliding doors moment that by the time she circled back to me, which was about 5 months later, it was just the opposite time, where cricket season was just winding down in Australia, and we were a bit chilled, and I didn't really have a big project for that winter. The winter before, I was involved in the FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia, so I had a busy winter that winter. But the winter of 2024 in Australia, I sort of didn't have much on, and Benita just called me at the right time. So it was the exact opposite. It was like, oh, maybe I could help out with this, and she really talked me into it, and I thought, yeah, really, we should have some involvement from Australia because we've got a lot of really good people here, and I can maybe write a bit myself and set up a few co-authors from this side of the world, get some from New Zealand, some from Australia. And I did talk to Jess, who's sitting next to me, and said, am I insane for saying yes to this? If I say yes to this, am I out of my mind? And Jess sort of said, oh, no, you might be able to get a few people. So I got a bit of support in the household that I wasn't too crazy. And I thought that if it worked out like it worked out, I thought, yes, this is definitely something that's going to be worth it. But both of us would have had the fear early on to think, what if we ask people to write chapters and no one decent accepts it because everyone just says, look, this is you asked me to devote a whole lot of time for this and not paying me any money and I can't do it. But as it's turned out, we've really assembled it's not every single person who's a superstar, but we've got lots of superstars with the book, and we don't regret it at all asking and leaning on people for doing it, because I think everyone who's involved has felt that their efforts were worthwhile because they've seen who's in the room with them. As in, they look around, they say, yeah, it was a bit of work to write my chapter or my chapters, but oh my God, they've got this person and this person and this person. It does come across as a bit of a who's who in the cricket sports medicine world. And I think that now it's all come together, people are quite excited by having been involved. And that's certainly how I felt. So I was the world's quickest knockback when I was first asked. And then I was lucky that 10 other people knocked Benita back before she circled back to me. And then I finally said yes. So
thank you, John. So I need, John is convinced that I asked other people, but I want to commit and my loyalty towards you, John, that I asked you and I asked you again. There was no one in between. So I did explain this to John previously. Because I know that John is perfectly positioned to do this work. I mean, and it's almost his whole career has been a build up, and this is almost like the peak of what is put together over so many years. So I'm really grateful. And just this morning, I wrote a LinkedIn post where I emphasized the importance of choosing a co-editor very wisely. And I think we understood each other from the start. So I'm really grateful for that, John. And thank you for that introduction to the book. So from my side, it was 4 November 2023 when Raman from Springer approached me and said, listen, we need to put this book together. And since then, a whole lot of things, like in the academic world, things doesn't happen overnight, as you may know by now. A whole bunch of things happened, and John came involved. And then we needed to figure out, what are we going to put in this book? Because, I mean, we could put anything. And even if you ask myself or John now, have we included all the chapters? Is it a complete book? And we would tell you that no, there's already chapters for the second edition that we said we're going to park and add in a future edition. So as a true academic that I am, I went to my email list and I did a bit of co-creation, and I asked people, what would you like to see in this book? If we put together a book like this, what should be in there? And I got a load of emails back. And then did a thematic analysis using in vivo software to put together a table of contents. And then John is much less complicated than I am. So I showed him this 4 hours of work, and he said, oh no, this is important, this is important, this is important. And together we merged our thoughts and inputs, and we created the table of contents. Now, I've got a real life hard copy with me, and I hope you can see it. It's thick and it's heavy. And it has got 422 pages and 39 chapters put together by 100 authors. So the book is aimed for whether doctors, orthopedic surgeons, sports physicians, physiotherapists, podiatrists, nutritionists, chiropractors, psychologists, and anyone else in the healthcare sector who's working with cricketers at all levels. The book is also useful for coaches, parents, players, and other cricket stakeholders. One of our requirements were that we needed to make sure that we write in a language that others can understand as well. As academics and experts in our field, we also often write in a language that only our own peers and colleagues can understand, but I can guarantee you these chapters are accessible. So if you are a coach or a parent or a player, I believe that you will enjoy the book as well. Now, I want to just at this point highlight the 100 experts that contributed to the book. While John and I are called the editors, we couldn't have done this without all the many contributions and all the willing experts from across the world that devoted their time. We ourselves wrote 4 or 5 chapters each, and the rest of the 39 chapters were written by experts, be it psychology, youth, female, lumbar stress fractures, and it was contributed by different experts from different countries, different spheres, academia, clinical practice. So those contributions really need to be acknowledged. So John and I have put the book together and we've done the project management, but the book belongs to all 100 authors who contributed to this book. Now, before I hand over to John to introduce our speaker, Greg de Moor, I want to remind you that there's a chance to win a physical copy of the book today. There will be a question at the end of the webinar about one of the bits and pieces of information that will be shared with you today by some of our authors. So listen carefully. I did wonder, what if I propose the question and nobody gets it right? But I'm sure you will. So I'll take one of these interesting facts and put them in the chat a bit later on, and you can get, if you answer it correctly, you'll post your answer in the Q&A, you can win a book. Then there's 20% discount for anyone who registered for the webinar, and that will be emailed afterwards. It's a voucher that will be sent in afterwards. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A. So it's easier to follow the Q&A than the chat. So post your questions. We may just get to it before the end of the webinar. Over to you, John.
Yeah, okay. Thanks again, Benita. I was also going to say that one of the huge carrots I dangled in front of all of the co-authors that I recruited was that if they wrote a chapter, I was going to be reviewer too. So if you write, like, everyone hates submitting articles to journals because of the hypothetical reviewer too, who's going to be the one who rips your paper to pieces and rejects it and makes you do all your data again from scratch. And the selling point was, if we're asking you to write a chapter, we think you're an expert and we will take your expertise. We'll do some typo editing and we'll do some layout editing for you, but we're not going to rip your expertise. We're already guaranteeing that we want to hear from you, and you'll get a peer review. It certainly counts as a peer review publication for everyone, but it will be that we accept your expertise in advance, and we will not be rejecting your chapter. Otherwise, we wouldn't be asking you in the first place. So we were in terms of that, the horror stories you get about peer review. Hopefully Benita and I are both reviewer 1 for everyone, and that we were the nice reviewer, and that no one had a horrible time submitting, and you only got assistance rather than hurdles put in front of you from your reviewers, which is sadly what happens when you submit your article to a journal. But anyway, I'll move on to introducing Greg de Moor. And Greg is certainly one of my favourite people and one of my favourite authors. We're really lucky to have him in Sydney, and he has done a wonderful job for many of the cricketers that we have based in Sydney, because he is a psychiatrist who understands elite sport, and he understands it so well because he's written his main work that he's published, and I would highly recommend it almost as much, if not more, than the actual book we're promoting today. But Greg Moore's written the biography of Tom Wills, who is a character who is critical in Australian history and Australian culture. So those of you who have visited Australia, you have to go to one of the southern states, and the city of Melbourne in particular, to understand how crazy Melburnians are for Aussie rules, the code. India and cricket is analogous to Melbourne and Aussie rules. So there's probably no one on the call from Melbourne tonight because they're playing one of the finals tonight. So Geelong's playing the Brisbane Lions in a final, and most of the AFL fans have probably decided to not attend the book launch because they're going to be too busy watching the local AFL finals. But they are totally crazy. So this sport that is the source of amusement at how insane Melburnians and those from the southern states, so South Australia and West Australia, are over this sport. It has this great link to cricket in that Tom Wills was the best cricketer in Australia in the 1860s at the same time that all of the sports worldwide were getting codified. So this is a very important decade in the history of sport, and those of us who work in sports should know more about it, that sport was informal before the 1860s, and then almost all the rules for the major sports were codified in the 1860s. And Tom Wills was absolutely critical in this, in that he spent the 1850s getting schooled at rugby school in England, and then he came back and not only helped write the rules for Australian football, but then became a professional cricketer over the time of the 1860s. So Greg Demore has written this wonderful biography, and if you are at all interested in Australian history, you should read it, and if you're interested in the history of sport, you should read it. But I'll introduce Greg now because we thought he would be fantastic to write the foreword of the book, because he's a great author himself, and Benita and I just write academic stuff, but Greg is a storyteller and has written a real book that you have to engage the author and take them on a journey that's over a much longer period of time. So really, we feel like our chapters are like ODIs, whereas he's a test match writer, as in it's a long form book that you don't read chapter by chapter. You sort of have to get into it and then come back to it on multiple occasions to read the whole thing. But anyway, I'd love to introduce Greg and would love to hear from him, because he is a great speaker. He's so loved in the New South Wales cricket community, and he has helped so many of our players, because as we all know, cricketers tend to be a little bit on the nutcase side, because they're playing a sport that is probably alongside golf, it's one of the great mental tortures and mental challenges to be an elite cricketer, because there's so much thinking time. It's very human to dwell on your performance when there's a lot of time to sit around and look at your imperfect performance, and you have to sort of somehow get over the fact that your performance was imperfect in order to come out and try and get more towards perfection next time. But anyway, Greg, if you're ready to talk, if you're not, if you're all not sick of me already, but I'd love to hear from Greg and have him talk a bit about himself and a bit about the book and writing the foreword for the book.
Thank you, thanks, John. So, Greg Demore is my name, and I work at a hospital in Sydney, Australia, called Westmead Hospital, and I'm associate professor of psychiatry there. So my base, Westmead, is a huge hospital. It's over 1,000 beds, and it's linked to the University of Sydney. So I've been given a few minutes to talk about, I think up to 10 minutes, and there are really just three things I wanted to say: a little bit about myself and how I got involved in this world of sport and mental health. The second thing I thought I might touch upon is that the foreword I wrote and what was in my mind. And just finally, just a few passing observations on what it's like to delve into the minds of cricketers, men and women, and which I've done for the last 10 years or so. And perhaps also a pointer for the future, for maybe future editions of the book. So, as I said, I work as an associate professor. I'm based in Sydney, and my work involves a lot of clinical work with patients. So I've looked after patients on inpatient mental health units. So I see people who have very serious mental health problems: bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, drug abuse, anorexia nervosa, as well as working in the community. And I've done that sort of work for many years. I've been director of the service in Western Sydney for many years. and I've also done quite a lot of clinical research and teaching. So I've really had my hand in a lot of activities. But as John mentioned, I've also been fascinated by writing and history. And so I wrote this book about Tom Wills, who, in my opinion, is without doubt Australia's most significant sportsman. It's not Don Bradman, it's actually Tom Wills. So he's the man who invents the biggest game in Australia, Australian football. He is our first great cricketer. And for those of you who don't know, he created what I think is Australia's most important cricket team. And that was an Aboriginal cricket team. These are the Indigenous people of Australia, the land I'm sitting in. And this cricket team that Tom Wills created in the 1860s went to England 10 years before the first white test team. So his story is far more than sport, and that's what drew me to him. Tragically, he died at an early age. He took his own life at the age of 44. And a lot of my research has been around suicidal behavior, particularly in men. And that's, again, one of the threads that led me to his story. So I told this story some time ago at a function for Cricket Australia, and the head of Cricket Australia approached me to talk about Tom Wills, Aboriginal cricketers from the past, and how we might be able to use this story. And not long after that, I was invited by colleagues of John's to see my first ever cricketer. So it was just under 10 years ago. And I remember it was Christmas time, they couldn't find a psychiatrist. And I remember the consultation. I got a call from Cricket, it was actually Cricket New South Wales, and they said, we have a player who's about to travel to Perth. He doesn't seem to be quite well. We think he needs some pills. Now, I didn't quite know what to make of that, but that was the kind of referral I got. Now, I won't mention the person's name, but when I saw this individual a couple of days later, the first pitfall hit me about treating these sort of patients, because from a distance, he had this beautiful bearing. He was tall, he was something like 6'4", 6'5", muscular, square shoulders, very militaristic. And I remember thinking to myself, well, there's no way he could possibly have anything wrong with him. It's going to be some sort of mild difficulty. And he came in, and I'd say within half an hour, once I'd scratched the surface, he revealed himself to have really a very profound, deep, what we call a major depression or clinical depression, with affected his sleep, his cognition, thoughts of self-harm. And I learned a lot from that initial consultation, not to be seduced or deceived by the apparent normalcy or almost a sort of super male or Superman figure of the professional cricketers, I would say. So that's how I got involved in the whole process. Now, when John asked me to write the foreword to this book, I was completely chuffed. I think it was towards the end. I think most of the chapters were probably in, and I might have been a bit of an afterthought, but I was so pleased to be asked. And what I tried to do in this foreword was to link some aspects of mental health and a little bit about the history of the game, but also tell it as a story. And so if you do look at the foreword, it's really about the life, it starts off about the life of Australia's youngest test captain. And his name was Ian Craig. He was captain of the Australian Test team in the 1950s, but he had a short career. He was overburdened by the belief that he was going to be the next Bradman. And so his career was actually quite brief and ephemeral. But the key thing was, when I met him over lunch, I said to him, what's the biggest difference between cricket when you played in the 1950s and now? So I met him around about 2012, so 60 years after he played. And quick as a shot, he said the biggest difference between cricket when I played in the 50s and now is simply helmets. And he said when he was a batsman, his first thought was, don't get hit. Then he made the decision what shot to play. He said, Greg, when you look at a batsman now, they're impervious to the thought of how they may be hit and how they may get hurt. And they play these shots in a manner that we would not have played back in the 1950s. Now, sadly, it was really not long after that Philip Hughes died on the Sydney Cricket Ground. And when I wrote this forward, it was close to 10 years after Philip Hughes's death. And so it gave me a lot of thought about what it meant and how that had actually changed the culture of cricket and the medical aspect of cricket. Over the 10 years I've been treating cricketers, just a few observations because of the shortness of time. I mentioned about that deceptive aspect. That's certainly something that I've held in mind. In fact, that first cricketer I saw, I remember he was actually on an antidepressant medication, and I didn't know how he had actually coped on the field with it, but he did very well. But I do remember once watching him in the IPL, and I got a phone call on my mobile as I was watching the game, and he was asking me whether he should up or lower his antidepressant medication. I knew I was in a completely different world to my normal world of psychiatry. The other sorts of things, the sort of things that the cricketers have taught me has really been the absolute importance of confidentiality. If you ask the cricketers that see me, what's the most important thing about coming to see a psychiatrist? It is this. It is that I don't impart what they tell me to their coaches or anyone in their organisation except whom they designate. That is really the most important thing about coming to see me, and I hold that dear to the way I practice. The other sorts of things that I'd just like to mention is I've seen as many women as men, very different aspects of what they present with. I think every single female cricketer I've seen has had as their main coach their father. And from a psychiatric point of view, the dynamics of their upbringing and how they separate from their fathers that's a book in itself. Other things that are really important are the points of real tension in cricketers' life from a psychiatric point of view in terms of their mental health is usually the beginning phase of their career when they're really struggling and they have tremendous self-doubt as to whether they can make it or not. And at the end of the career, when they're beginning to struggle, they're thinking about money, contracts bedevil their thinking, and they're often in a lot of chronic pain. They're those 2 points are when we see most of the problems rise to the surface. And pain, as I mentioned, that's a common bedfellow of all the mental health problems that I've seen. The commonest diagnosis that I've seen over the last 10 years is depression. And this is not necessarily a mild depression. You know, I've had several cricketers who have talked quite frankly about wanting to harm themselves. And I remember on a couple of occasions when cricketers have left my rooms really being highly anxious as to what they were about to do. And that brings into play the other aspect of treating people like this is that you are seeing these patients, but you're also highly anxious about what they might do outside and how that might be portrayed in the media. And that was always something that has been uppermost in my mind. So mood disorders, depression, anxiety. I've seen a couple of cricketers who have suffered from post-trauma syndromes, both related to terrorist incidents whilst they've been overseas, which was most interesting, and both of those people did remarkably well. And of course, substance abuse. Of course, alcohol is the commonest, but stimulants, amphetamines, cocaine, are not strangers to the professional cricketer in my experience, and also, of course, marijuana. What I would like to say is that I think this is a really wonderful accomplishment. Benita, John, and everyone, you should all feel incredibly proud of it, and I feel really delighted and incredibly pleased that you've done me the honour of asking me to write the foreword, and I hope I've done a good enough job. What I would like to see, and what I'm sure will happen in the future, though, is that we will have a chapter and maybe indeed chapters on the mental health and the care of the psychiatric aspect of cricketers, because really, without that, you're not really caring for the cricketer in a holistic manner. John, Benita, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Greg. That was amazing. And go and read that forward. I know that's sometimes the section that we skip because we want to get to the chapter that speaks to us directly and what we were looking for, but that forward really is very important. I'm going to hand back to John. He's going to give us an overview of the evolution of cricket sports medicine.
you want me to do the slideshow now, Benita? Is that
Yes, it's time.
okay? Beautiful. All right, I'll try to. We're on Zoom now, so I've got to work out how to share the screen. I'm lucky to have someone here who knows how to do it. Maybe.
Are you a co-host? Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Yep. All right. How's that looking for everyone?
We can see it. You can go into full
Yeah,
presentation
beautiful. Okay.
mode.
All right, fantastic. So I'm going to stop that. It seems to want to do a pre-record that I did earlier today. So I'll try to do it again um, and yeah, this is not good.
John, I have a version that is not recorded if you want me to share that
Yeah,
version.
how about you share that? That'd be good.
Perfect.
Fantastic. I did a trial run today and
Give me a
this
second.
wouldn't be a teleconference without a snafu. So awesome. That's looking great.
What do you see in front of you? Because it is.
We're
I'm
seeing
working
the
on two
whole
screens.
thing. So yeah, it's the notes mode. If it's possible to get to the full screen, that would be better. But it doesn't matter. We can use.
Yeah, so I think you just need. There we go, Benita.
That's better.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, we're all good. So I'll just have to signal to Benita to flick on to the next slide. So fire away with the next slide, and I'll try and go through this quickly so I don't take up the rest of the presentation. But so yeah, I was going to start off with talking about cricket in the mid 20th century. This is interesting. I'll circle back to doctors only coming on tour in the last 15 or so years in cricket, which shows how recent the evolution's been. But there was a time in the 1960s and 1970s when doctors did actually regularly go on tour with cricket teams when they went to the Indian subcontinent. And the biggest reason for taking them was actually illness. And so the history of travel in cricket was that there were plenty of cricketers who were so ill they couldn't compete, and retired ill or unable to bat due to illness was a much more common phenomenon back in the 1960s. And in fact, there were some cricketers who got so ill from conditions like hepatitis that they were actually ended their career. So it was really interesting to circle back to that era where teams didn't take physios in the 1960s, but they took doctors because they were so scared of illness. And vaccination, which is now getting questioned very sadly, sort of came to the rescue of cricketers, making it safe to travel and that you weren't going to necessarily die of or get seriously ill from some of the medical conditions that might have affected you traveling to countries like India. So that's a fascinating bit of history. So the time that they stopped taking doctors is about the time they started taking physios, and that was a good evolution in that physios are more efficient and do more work on tour than doctors do. So next slide, Benita. And I've got a few. Don't talk a lot about deaths in the book, but I've got a few that are going to crop up here. One that probably no one's ever heard of outside Australia. There's a cricketer called Martin Bedcobur who was living with Jeff Thompson at the time and was about to get a first-class debut for Queensland. He was stuck behind Steve Rickson in New South Wales as a wicketkeeper and couldn't get into the New South Wales team, and he was promised a place in the Queensland team. And he was playing grade cricket in Brisbane and was batting and struck in the heart and died of commotio cordis. So it's a not well known about injury outside Australia, but one that if it had happened in a Shield game, it would have been far more widespread in terms of the story of it. But it just goes to show that that major illness and injury is a ever-present risk, even though it's very low. So next slide, Benita. I'm really looking forward to the 2027 150-year test between Australia and England. And part of it is because of how fantastic the centenary test was. And there was a famous injury there where Rick McCosker had a broken jaw and came back out to bat in the second innings, not in his usual opening spot, but down the order. And you can see with this ridiculous bandage, so he wasn't wearing a helmet, but he had this broken jaw and was trying to hold his face together with this makeshift bandage, which was just one of the amazing things about that game. Another thing that was amazing is that almost the entire Australian team had signed to play in World Series cricket, and the whole cricket world was about to get upended. And it was a fantastic game that was almost played in English-like conditions, in that there was a green top early on and then the pitch flattened out and both teams got a lot of runs in the second innings. The actual margin was the same as the margin of the first ever test played between Australia and England, which was 45 runs to Australia. And it's also interesting that about a third of the players who played in that game are no longer with us for various reasons. So it just goes to show how long that is. But really, the modern era of cricket started immediately subsequent to this game, in that World Series cricket started, which was really cricket entering the fully professional age, where the players were paid proper money to play. So next slide. And then another incident happened soon after this, where Rick Darling got hit in the heart in an Ashes test that was back in Australia, in Adelaide, and could easily have been another Martin Bedkober, and there wasn't much medical care available on the ground. In fact, he probably had his life saved by John Embry, who was an English spinner who was on the field, who'd recently done a first aid course, and he certainly was reported to be unconscious and not responding and not breathing, and John Embry gave him a precordial thump, and it's still probably not 100% known whether he had commotio cordis and he'd actually had an arrest and his heart had stopped and the precordial thump worked and acted like a defibrillator, or some people think he might have choked on his chewing gum and it could have aspirated and blocked up his larynx and the gum came out. But either way, he had his life saved by a fellow player, and the medical care was very rudimentary in that day and age. So Rick Darling's still alive today, and apparently gets epilepsy from the number of times he was hit in the head, and some of them were pre-helmet and some of them were post-helmet. But yeah, another evolution. Helmets did start to come in after World Series cricket. So next slide, Benita. And then moving forwards to the 1986 Tide Test, so one of only 2 Tide Tests ever played. That was obviously a great event in the fact that it was tied, but very famous for Dean Jones, who has subsequently died of something else, but allegedly almost died as a player on the field due to severe gastroenteritis and dehydration. And again, Australia didn't have a doctor in that era, travelling to India. And the most amazing thing is how Dean Jones managed to score 200 runs when he was clearly not really fit to be out there. But again, in that era, no one was questioning, and he just stayed out there, and somehow he didn't get dismissed when he really should have, because if he was dizzy and vomiting and not seeing the ball straight, it's amazing they didn't get him out. But he was certainly the most famous innings, and then it was very famous at the end, the fact that the game was tied. So next slide. And then I've moved forward to 2000, and I've got Trevor James, who was the inaugural Chief Medical Officer for Cricket Australia. This is a press conference he did that I've got a photo of, where he announced that Brett Lee was going to miss an entire summer with lumbar stress fractures. And that's now a routine announcement that happens in this day and age, that players are out for a season with lumbar stress fractures. But it was particularly unusual in that day and age, because the standard of care was in the year 2000 was that you had a month off and then you try to get back and bowl again if you had a lumbar stress fracture. And the decision had been made that Brett Lee was going to miss the entire summer to try to get the stress fracture to fully heal. So he's a bowler who was known to get up to 150 kilometres an hour in pace, and they didn't want him to lose his pace, so they thought it wasn't going to be a good idea to try and keep playing with it. And that was perhaps one of the first, shortly followed by Mitchell Johnson, who was a similar bowler of express pace, where the preference was made to try to get the injury healed rather than to keep playing with it. So that was a famous moment in cricket. So next slide. I've got in here Shane Warne testing positive for a diuretic. He's no longer alive, so you're all welcome to your own opinions about what might have happened. But again, we're still in an era in 2003 where the excuse that was given that he got a diuretic from his mum and had no idea, and it was because he was looking a bit chubby. His mum said, "Oh, make sure you get a bit less flabby around the chin. And if you take one of these, you'll look better in front of the cameras." That was an unquestioned response as to why he tested positive. And there wasn't in that era a doctor on tour with the Australian cricket team to say, well, is this diuretic legal in sport? And it's really the number one reason. Concussion's probably the number two reason, but the number one reason why doctors are very useful on tour is that you've got someone to go through the wider rules and make sure that anything that you take is legal. And that's a very important role that doctors now play. So next slide. In the same year, in 2003, it's a story I heard from Akshay Man Singh and he might not be with us because I think it's the middle of the night in Jamaica, but another famous cricket story that two players were struck by lightning in a game. And I think I've got a correct picture of what the field was like. So you can look at that field and say, well, there are no grandstands and no light towers, and maybe that is the sort of field that lightning would hit the playing field. We don't really know whether you're absolutely protected by grandstands and light towers. You're probably 99% protected, but on a field like this where you don't have grandstands, you're not protected. And the umpires did not call the game off. So the fact that we laugh about how ridiculous sometimes the bad light and the rain rules are in cricket, but two players being struck by lightning was not enough for them to call the game off. And the bowler who got struck actually continued the rest of the over. And then later on, they did stop because it started raining. So it's an amazing story that a lightning strike that actually hit two players who both ended up later that day in ICU was not enough to stop play. But then when it started raining, as per always in cricket, that's enough to get the players scurrying off the ground because it's not safe. It wasn't unsafe when they were struck by lightning, but obviously unsafe that they might slip over in the rain. So next slide. We had a death in a state-based cricketer in 2005, and looking back on it, it is amazing again that it didn't get as much publicity. It was Scott Mason, who had a valve replacement and was playing apparently against the advice of his specialists, and he just said, "Oh, look, I want to keep playing." And it was in an era, again, only 20 years ago, where there wasn't a massive in-house legal team that would have gone through the process of waivers and second and third opinions, and it was just taken for granted if the player wanted to keep playing against medical advice, he could. And he had a heart attack at training and was taken from training to hospital but didn't survive. And again, the fact that that story is not well known outside Australia is fairly amazing, because it goes to show how much cricket has changed in the last 20 years in terms of professionalism. So next slide. And 2006, I just got up here for the S&Cs. Australia was the country that launched the GPS era, and the role of the strength and conditioners is enormously dependent on the data that they get from measuring players. So it actually started in a sport, rugby league, that is not considered to be at the cutting edge in some aspects, but it was the sport which led this revolution, and it's now a famous Australian export that all the American sports and all the English sports use GPS, and it was an invention that was an Australian invention, which is pretty amazing. That again is less than 20 years old now, but we just take for granted. The next slide. And 2007, that's a picture of me looking a little bit more attractive. But that was the first tour that Australia had taken a doctor for over 25 years at the time. And it was only because we went to India. It was 2012 when we said that we were going to take a doctor on every men's tour that we went on. And again, this is 18 years ago that was the first time we took a doctor, and then we still weren't taking doctors to England and New Zealand. So it really has, it seems slow, but it's happened quite quickly that medicine has become part of the professionalism of cricket in the last 20 years. And I did, before it became illegal, I did use intravenous hydration on some of the players who got sick with gastro in the hotel room, which you're now no longer allowed to do. But I did do it at a time when it was legal in 2007. So next slide. And then 2010, I did meet Nick Pearce over in the T20 World Cup, where England beat Australia in the men's final. But we had a women's team over there who didn't get a doctor because no one had thought that women needed a doctor for their team. But Leah Poulton, who was the opening bat for Australia, she injured her ankle just before the semi-final. And would you believe she injured it doing boundary rope catching practice, which has been a bugbear that still hasn't been solved in T20 cricket, where players are practicing acrobatic catches against the rope, and she sprained an ankle. And there have been at least 20 or 30 players since that time that have done bad ankle sprains, doing exactly the same thing, practicing catches against the boundary rope. And she couldn't walk. And was fortunate I was over there, as I was co-opted to come across and work for the women's team in the finals as well as the men's team to inject her ankle up. And she did very well in the finals and they won. And it was also lucky she didn't have any more games for about 6 months. So the ankle did have time to recover. So, it was very much football final-like there, and lucky that I was available for the women's team. But again, this is only 15 years ago, and Australia had no even thought process that we're going to send a doctor with the women's team. And that's now just automatic in the last few years. So next slide. Might need to go forwards. I can't blame this. Yeah, 2012 was a time when in a domestic comp in Australia, put this one up, that there was a player who was concussed and had memory loss of the incident, and was sent back out to hit the winning runs in a domestic red ball game. And so shortly after this, we started to get concussion protocols to say this is not allowed to happen. But it was only 13 years ago that it was still happening, that because you didn't get a sub for concussion, and if the team needed you to win the game, if you were concussed, well, you just went out there and had to bat because you didn't get an extra player and you needed to use that wicket. So that's not a famous incident in Australia, but sort of famous in that someone like me looking at that was saying, well, this is not a sport that's functioning in a healthy fashion, that someone who was clearly concussed had to go out and bat again. That's just not a safe situation to be in. Anyway, next slide.
Sorry, it gets stuck.
I can't blame you because I was the one who yeah, I'm not going to talk very much about this, but again, this did change a lot in terms of I was talking to a brick wall in 2012 when I was saying, well, it wasn't good that a player went out and hit the winning runs with concussion. And then in Australia, these sort of conversations started getting taken a lot more seriously, obviously, after this happened. Neck protectors obviously happened as a result of this because it was considered an area of exposure. And certainly medicine got taken much more seriously after this horrible event, which I won't talk about anymore. But Nick, flick on to the next slide after this. There was another high-profile player. Again, most people wouldn't have heard of Raymond Van Shaw, but he died on the field in a match in South Africa in 2015 and died officially of a cardiovascular stroke. I think it was ischemic. It was a hot day, so it possibly was somewhat heat related, but again, didn't get as much publicity it probably should have, but just goes to show that all sorts of events are possible. And there was another young cricketer that we lost at an early age, fairly soon after Philip Hughes. I've got this one up because I think that this is a an injury that led to 3 rule changes in the and maybe more than 3 coming out of the one injury. So Alyssa Healy was wicket keeping up to the stumps to a medium pace bowler without a helmet on, just with a cap on, and Meg Lanning got caught in the gully off Alyssa's forehead. So Meg edged the ball upwards. Alyssa couldn't get her gloves up in time. It hit her forehead, and the player at gully caught her out. And so all of the below happened. After Alyssa actually came out to bat as well, and we realised afterwards that she definitely had a concussion, but hadn't had as full assessment as she should have been given. So we decided that women's games needed doctors as well as men's games, which wasn't happening in 2015. So that came in as a rule. They changed the rule to say that you had to wear a helmet standing up to the stumps, and they also changed the rule to say that if you were caught off the helmet, it was out. Because Alyssa was saying, well, I was really lucky I wasn't wearing a helmet because Meg was out because she was caught off the forehead. Whereas at that time, if it had gone off her helmet and been caught, it would have been not out because it would have been illegal use of the helmet. So she wasn't thinking about whether her brain would have been better off. She was thinking about, well, unless I got the wicket or contributed to the wicket. And this is when we started really tightening up our concussion policy to say, well, this wasn't a good look that she came out and batted after this as well. So anyway, next slide. And then we're now in an era where workload management is just part of the vernacular, and everyone, even the coaches and the fast bowlers themselves, will agree with it. But there's an article only 8 years ago that was entitled "How Cricket's Workload Management is Poisoning the Game and Its Players." And there are still some people who think a bit like that, but I think we've finally got it turned around where that view is now considered more of a dinosaur view. But it wasn't that long ago that it was a mainstream view that we shouldn't be counting how many balls the bowlers were bowling. We shouldn't be telling them that they're in the red zone or anything like that. Next slide. And then very famous incident that everyone would know of where the most like for like in the history of cricket was Steve Smith being replaced by Marnus Labuschagne after the first concussion sub came in the first series after the concussion subs became available, and we were very lucky that it was a very appropriate sub. England weren't complaining because Steve Smith was almost impossible to get out in that series in 2019. So they weren't unhappy to see him out of the game, and Australia was able to sub him out and not be one short and get a sub batter to come in. And I think that how well that worked was enough for everyone to say, yeah, that actually makes sense. I'm glad we got a concussion sub. This is a good rule change. So it's nice that that's been well accepted by the cricket world. And there's a little bit of serendipity that the first use of it was a very appropriate use that neither side had any problems with. I also have up in here, this is one of 1977 Centenary Test was very memorable. This was a very memorable game. I was lucky enough to watch this as a spectator. So Pip Inge was actually working as the team doctor. So I was actually up in the stand able to enjoy seeing this game. And it was a world record crowd. I think it was about 86,000 people for a women's game, which is fantastic at the MCG. But it's extremely memorable, not just for the game, but because unbeknownst to us, there was one COVID positive person in the crowd who had just flown in from the US a couple of days earlier. And within a week after this game, we were playing, we were meant to play 2 games the following weekend against New Zealand in the men's, which I was covering. The first game was played behind closed doors with a shutout. It was a weird experience, in an empty grandstand. And then the second game was actually called off because New Zealand shut the borders and said all New Zealanders who are not in New Zealand have got 24 hours to get back in the country, or you'll have to do a 2-week quarantine. So the New Zealand cricketers left their camp in Sydney and went back home, so they didn't have to do the quarantine. And I think Australia basically ended up with a locked border for 2 years because New Zealand did it. And I think that Australia sort of was shamed into it a little bit to think, well, we're an island as well, and we could get away and do it. But that's all I'll talk about COVID, because no one wants to talk about COVID anymore. But we had a crowd of 86,000 the week before COVID started, which is pretty amazing. And it was great. It was fantastic that it was for a women's game too. That was a standalone women's game, and wonderful experience. And the next slide, which I think is the final one, and I've probably talked too long, but all of those experiences are how we get to where we are today, where we've released a book, which has taken a while, but I'm really glad it's out there. So thanks very much, Benita.
This is absolutely fantastic. Can you see why I'm saying that he's the icon of the sport, and that's a lifetime of experiences? And thanks for sharing that, John. And to hear it from you firsthand is really, really special. So now our next step is we are going to go over, and we've invited one of our authors. We've invited quite a few authors, but the first one that I would like to just give an opportunity to answer a few questions is Saban J. Now, Saban wrote a paper on the lived experience of being a fast bowler with an injury. Now, us as healthcare providers, we're standing on the other side, and what will a book be without hearing firsthand from those who are on the receiving end of our care? So, Saban, you can unmute. So Saban is a student here at Brookes University, and our chapter author, one of the chapters where he explains his whole story. So if you enjoy bedtime stories, it's really an intriguing story to hear and to get to the other side of a player. He's also a prolific cricket player. And I want to ask you, Saban, what was the physical and emotional impact of your injury? If you think back of that lumbar spine injury that you had, what was your thoughts and how did it influence you as a human?
First of all, hi everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Benita. First of all, I've been playing cricket. I started playing cricket since I was 9 years old. And cricket, from a background I belong from, is like a religion. And starting playing cricket at the age of 9, and then carried on seeing a lot of players as an inspiration, and that was a moment where I felt like I want to pursue as a career. 2 years ago, I had a massive setback because I had a lumbar spine injury because I'm a fast bowler, and the kind of bowling action I had, I used to lean back quite a lot before before my jump, and that would put massive stress and strain on my back, and but that used to help me generate massive amount of pace. But due to lack of knowledge and lack of awareness, and there was no such as awareness I had at that point, that how much load I'm putting, and in longer run, if I see myself, I don't think so I would be playing for a longer period with this kind of bowling action. But again, there was nobody to pinpoint that. So having that setback, and especially for a guy for whom cricket is everything, I went to a different country when I was 14 years old. I left my family just by myself. I went there, and the reason of moving to a different country was cricket. And for a guy like me, cricket was everything. If I'm sad, happy, lonely, by myself, with friends, like cricket is like, it means the world to me. So for a guy like me, when I was away from cricket for about 1 year, I had a surgery. I had a back surgery. So when I was completely out from the game and sitting on the side, watching all my mates, all the team play cricket, especially in the summer, that is a kind of time period where I was just clueless at how to react, how to behave emotionally. Because again, as I said, I've never been in that situation where I'm just watching from the sideline. I've always been involved in the game, if not physically, then emotionally. But that was the time period where I was just clueless how to express myself, and how to explain like how it feels to just sit outside and not able to do what you love to do. So that's why then I got in contact with you, because it was one of the part of my independent study module, and I got in contact with you that I want to write something about it. And then you came up with this idea of writing a chapter for your book, which was obviously a win-win situation for me, because I can write for you as well as work myself for my independent study module. So I just felt like that this injury has played a massive role in my cricketing career, because it made me what I am today. Because if I look back today, obviously I don't want to go back again, but if I look back and I see myself, I'm a lot more mentally stronger than I was before, because I think, as they say, the ending of one thing is the starting of another thing. So when I got injured, it was obviously the ending of my cricketing season, but that time made me mentally very strong. And a lot of cricketers, the famous cricketers I've played with, or the people I know, they always say one thing, and that is like, cricket is 90% from here and just 10% from physical. And that's actually very true. And I actually felt that, because you can control your body. You can obviously hit the gym for 3 hours, 4 hours. You can play cricket as long as you want. But to control your mind, this is something which needs a lot of practice. And in order to be mentally very strong, you need to have setbacks like that. So that was a massive push for me and a massive motivation for me to be a part of this book and express myself and my emotions and the journey I had.
And thank you, Saban. That's really good to hear from you firsthand. Thank you for being here and joining us today. Feel free to pop into my office at some point. I definitely owe you a coffee and a congratulatory celebration.
Cheers.
Well done, Saban.
Cheers. Thank you.
So now over to our series of other authors that we have lined up. So it was very difficult. I would love to have every single of the 100 authors say their word here, because each one of them have got a voice and a message to share. But we thought we're going to just from each section, just pick one random chapter. And we really would like these authors to just say a few words about their chapter and something about just giving you a takeaway, the highlights of their chapter. So I'm giving them the freedom to each one of them will give you a message. Now, first up is Francie Marie Olivier. She's a physiotherapist in private practice and a PhD researcher at the University of the Witwatersrand, South Africa. Over to you, Francie.
Thank you so much, Benita. Much appreciated. First of all, congratulations, John and Benita, on this phenomenal publication. And thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute to this. I think that's the highlight of my journey. I'm very fond of sports. I love cricket. I enjoy working with adolescent patients in clinical practice. So the writing of this chapter was a happy marriage of all of the above. If I talk about the youth cricketer, I have to share a story which is unfortunately first-hand experience and also not that uncommon like Suban's just illustrated to us. But the outcome is stuck with me, and it's etched in my mind. So always urging me on to keep researching, but most importantly, I think, to keep on sharing and educating. So this is not repeated in the realm of the educated. So a feisty 14-year-old bowler, rising star of his team, contributing greatly to his team success, is on his first high school cricket tour away from home. Like I said, he's contributing, he's bowling. They love him to open because he makes a massive difference. He shares his intense physical discomfort with his coaches and team manager on day 2. But like I said to him, remember, tomorrow, day 3, is a very important one. So listen, do whatever you need to. We need you bowling tomorrow morning. So go stretch, roll, ice bath, and we'll even strap your sore hamstring, but we need you tomorrow morning. On the third ball of his second over the next morning, he collapsed on the pitch, not knowing that this was his season-ending delivery and that he won't be bowling soon. This is not an unfamiliar setting, and without pointing fingers, the message today is that our youth cricketers are not small adult versions, and knowledge sharing and education could be pivotal in avoiding this from happening. So just quickly, how is the young player different from an adult, apart from the physical size? Well, there's something called peak height velocity, and that's when they grow like lightning. During this period, they grow so fast they can have a linear height increase between 9 and 12 centimeters. Boys and girls differ. Very often, obviously, the girls a slight bit earlier, around the age of 12. Boys a bit later, around the age of 14. And I don't want to make too much about the ages because that's controversial. But within this period comes a few not so nice spin-offs. So these bones have just grown. Bone mineral density is decreased. The bone is lengthened. It's not densely packed yet. So now your players are vulnerable to fractures. So the growth plates and cartilage are thicker. Injuries to the growth plates can be really serious and may cause permanent damage and eventually early onset of osteoarthritis. And now with these increased limb lengths, longer levers, they're heavier, there's quite a bit of tension because there's now soft tissue lag. The bones have grown, the soft tissue is trying to keep up. And with spikes in workload, now you might have a bit of inflammation on that supposedly weak link at that stage, which is the apophysis or the insertion. With the less mature player and with the more mature player, most probably more a muscular condition, a tendinopathy of sorts. Clinically, I think it's important that we remember that a so-called simple ankle sprain might not be a simple ankle sprain. So in your less mature player, you might end up with an avulsion fracture where a portion of the bone fragment is actually pulled off the bone due to that insertion, the pressure, tension exerted there. And then, we've got to remember that treatment is different. Your whole management is completely different. Lastly, with this new body of this grown person, we observe the adolescent awkwardness, and I'm sure you've seen that. Very often they appear to be a bit clumsy, and as healthcare professionals, we refer to that obviously as the compromised neuromuscular control. So just to top it all off, on top of that, the cherry on top is now they're even more put at more increased risk of injury. So not necessarily a great time. Just an interesting note, we've got to remember that with our adolescents, they've got a distal to proximal far too close growth pattern. So first the feet will grow, then the lower legs, upper body. So very often you'll see these lanky legs with a shorter upper body, and that's all part of the growth process. But at the same time, also our injury patterns. So very often you'll see once again, I don't want to stress the age, but a younger, let's say an 11-year-old guy with a bit of a heel ache, Sever's disease, and eventually later on it might be a Osgood-Schlatter, where the patellar tendon inserts on the tibial tuberosity or a jumper's knee. So as they grow distal to proximally, they also have that distal to proximal injury pattern. So what are the take-home messages today, I think, from our chapter? First of all, look, listen, and consider. So what are we looking at? Look at that player in front of you. Really look at him. Observe. Are the long whites no longer long? They might not be white either. But are they no longer long? Then they're probably in that peak height velocity period. And considering what we've discussed today, then they might be a little bit more vulnerable. Listen to the young player. Really, his niggle might be nothing, but it might also not be, as we've discussed today. So just be considerate. Consider the special considerations. Respect these growing bodies. I think that's so important. And if you are working with young players, education should be so high on your priority list. In that way, a young bowler with a missed lumbar stress fracture won't be asked to bowl fixed up with hamstring strapping. So let's guard and guide our youngsters to excel at what they love. Let's look, listen, refer, and manage appropriately. They really are special.
Brilliant. Thank you, Francie-Marie. This is a lovely highlights that you've given. And the chapter is appropriately called The Youth Cricketer, Special Considerations for a Period Characterized by Rapid Growth and Maturation. Thanks, Francie. Next up is Associate Professor from University of Sydney, Jessica Orchard, and their chapter is titled Pre-Participation Cardiac Screening in Professional Cricket. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks very much, Benita. And even though it looks like I'm on mute, I'm using John's microphone so that hopefully that's all clear sound. Again, congratulations to you, Benita and John, on an amazing project, bringing together a wealth of information and covering everything, and a fantastic forward by Greg as well. Lovely to hear it. So it was my great pleasure to write together with some wonderful co-authors, the chapter on cardiac screening in cricket. And I think Estela's on the call as well. We also work with Nick Pearce from the UK and Hamish McLaughlin as well. I will give a quite brief summary here, and hopefully we'll have time to hear from the other chapter co-authors as well. But the essence is that screening in athletes at the elite or professional level in cricket by Cricket Australia, the ECB, and by Sri Lankan programs, but it's not mandated by the ICC. So when we talk about screening, we talk about a personal and family history, a physical examination, and a resting 12-lead ECG. The ECB does also include an echocardiogram for players once per career, which is debated in terms of pros and cons with the expense. So in our chapter, we go through some epi and some of the examples and detailed results from the countries that have done an audit of their cardiac screening programs. And obviously, when you're doing cardiac screening, you really hope you don't find anything, but part of your job is to be prepared for emergencies, because that is something that really can happen. And John's really nicely gone through some of the examples. And we talk about cardiac emergency planning, but really you're talking about any emergency planning, so any major incident. So the single best thing that cricket at any level in any place can do for prevention of sudden cardiac death is the early recognition and response of what could be a sudden cardiac arrest, ideally with a defibrillator available. So what I'm just going to finish up saying here is that any collapse on the sporting field should be treated as cardiac until proven otherwise. So and until you're sure it's heat stroke or something else, it has to be treated as cardiac. So that's the message I'm going to finish with. Thanks so much.
Brilliant, Jess. Thank you for that really crisp and clear message. Next up is Dr. Rowan Shelton. He's an orthopedic spine surgeon based in Christchurch, New Zealand, and him and his team wrote the chapter on lumbar stress fracture surgery.
Yeah, thanks, Benita, and good evening, everyone from New Zealand, where it's almost midnight. I want to congratulate John and Benita and all the other contributors. It's really an honour to be involved, and like Benita said, I'm part of a team that wrote a chapter with Dale Shackle, and we have developed a niche or some experience, certainly locally here in Christchurch, on the operating on surgery for stress injury management for probably over 20 years. I took over from my mentor Graham Ingalls, who sort of set the scene in New Zealand, and it's a chapter that is part of a special section that focuses on lumbar stress injuries in the book, and I think it's appropriate because it's a big impact on bowlers. I think we all know that, of all ages and all abilities, and we can see it these days in the professional game, where lumbar stress injuries or the threat of lumbar stress injuries are now ever present and are influencing things in a number of levels, even down to team selections and rotation policies and these 5-match test series. And certainly, fast bowlers in the professional game who have the ability to bowl year round are now having to make decisions on what formats and what contributions they can what contribution they can have to manage their workloads to prevent themselves from developing stress injuries. And then in the amateur game, it's also having a big impact, and I think there's a lot more awareness now in a young athlete that low back pain in the setting of a fast bowler has a high risk of being a lumbar stress injury, and with the increasing access to MRI scans, it's culminating in a greater number of those diagnoses. So that injury, it's an injury that deserves the attention it gets in the book, and I think the reason you need a chapter on surgery is that not all of these injuries actually behave, and not all of them heal reliably and in a lasting way with conservative care. And when they don't, one of the considerations is therefore, what is surgery an option? And I guess that's where our book comes in, and Dale and I have tried to structure the chapter in a way that takes you into the consult room. We want to put you in the room next to us when we're talking to the player, when we're talking to the coaches and the medical teams, and we're discussing the key issues. And the chapter really is designed to provide, or to ask those questions and then provide commentary around the answers to what are the fundamental questions that are pertinent. You know, some of the lumbar stress injuries are suitable to surgery, some are not. So which ones are, which ones aren't? You know, what are the expected outcomes from lumbar surgery? Will it prevent the fracture from reoccurring? What are the risks of surgery? So we try and pose all those questions and provide you with the commentary that we give in the consult room, so you get a first-hand understanding of what's being discussed. And in the same way, we try and take you into the operating room and share with you some of the discussions and decisions that the surgeons make about what surgical techniques are going to be employed. There's a number of different options, and we try and give you some understanding of the rationale why some techniques are favoured. And then the chapter really finishes up with insights on post-op rehab. And again, we're trying to take you into that phase of the treatment in the early post-operative period, and often it's Dale talking to a player, or he might even still be in hospital post-surgery, about what their rehab's going to look like and how does that compare to standard non-operative rehab. Is it going to be fundamentally different, or are there many similarities? Are they going to be able to get back faster? All these sort of questions that are pertinent to the idea of surgery are posed in that question, in that chapter, and we provide the answers that I think gives insights into to everyone about what's being discussed between us as surgeons and physios and coaches. So you have a better understanding of the issues being considered for what are very challenging and burdensome injuries. So that's all I can sort of summarise of the chapter.
Thanks, Rowan. And I like your approach of taking people into the clinical practice, and so that whoever's the reader, are next to you as you perform your duties. I think that's the best way to learn. Next up is Ben Langley. He and his team wrote a chapter on elbow injuries in cricket. He's a physiotherapist in various different roles, always busy with something exciting, but he's also deeply involved with the IPL. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Benita. Everyone can hear me okay? Sorry, I just want to check. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, just a quick congratulations and well done to yourself, Benita and John. I think the book's going to be amazing. I've started reading through some of the other chapters myself. Rowan and Dale and myself have liaised around players with lumbar stress injuries in the past, but I'm very keen to see what goes into the book that will differ from conversations just around the case studies that we've worked on so far. So yeah, for someone like myself who's worked in the professional game for coming up to a couple of decades now, I'm still very intrigued, and I'll be reading every chapter to see. I'm sure there's going to be something that I will pick up from the book in every single chapter. So yeah, well done to everyone, and looking forward to what it's going to provide. Yeah, so with respect to the elbow chapter, it was a bit of a random one. I wouldn't have said it would have made the first cut of the book if you were being ruthless. But personally, I reflected on the fact that I recently I just finished up working with England cricket, and I was moving on to my next role with Mumbai Indians in the IPL. And I had a couple of pretty high-profile players suffered a pretty significant injury of the elbow, both being stress fractures. And I'd engaged with Professor Roger van Riet from Belgium, who's not on the call this morning. But we had some pretty extensive conversations, as you can imagine, around those couple of players. And then I reflected on that. Okay, so that's just a couple of case studies. And then I thought, well, no, I've seen quite a few players with elbow issues when they're fielding from throwing, and elbow issues when they're batting. So you do a quick Google search, and all of a sudden there's quite a lot, especially in the men's game. And I'd like to thank Elise Potter, who was one of the co-authors, who's just had a baby actually, so I'm not expecting her on the call at the moment. She'll be busy with other things, but it was good to get Elise's thoughts. She's worked a lot in the women's game in Australia, and also now in the WPL in India, around the impact of elbow injuries in the women's game, which is not a lot. It's definitely something that you tend to see more of in the men's game as it stands. But as John made mention of before, everything's evolving, and it's not going to surprise me with the changes in the way cricket's been played in both men's and women's game, that injury profiles are going to change. With the elbow, if you look at the injury surveillance that's been published in the past, you wouldn't say it is pretty particularly impactful. Predominantly going to be non-time loss type injuries, which wouldn't have been highlighted too much as one of your major issues in cricket. But because of those, my personal experience and what I'd seen, as I said, even just with a quick Google search and just seeing how it impacted a lot of men's players in the elite game across a lot of different countries, I thought it was worth, and I pushed with both Benita and John to add a chapter with respect to it. I don't claim to be an expert on elbows. I've seen quite a few of them. So I thought, look, a good place to start is let's pull together the thoughts of myself, Roger, and Elise. And it's definitely going to be one of those chapters that will evolve in future editions, I'm sure. So just loosely, in terms of what I've seen in cricket with elbow injuries, is first and foremost, I would have seen a lot of elbow pain just derived from fielding. In particular, throwing. When I first started in cricket, there would be quite lengthy breaks between when players might throw, because they'd only probably pick up their throwing just before they're about to, go into a competitive period. So there might have been weeks or even months where they'd hardly thrown. And as you'd expect, that the workload increase was pretty dramatic, and people end up blowing their elbows out and being pretty sore. But typically, if you just backed off on them a little bit of conservative management, they would settle down and they wouldn't have too many troubles. But as you pick up on things, the throwing is becoming increasingly demanding, particularly in the IPL, and you'll see players getting very, very short breaks between cricket now, so they're tending to throw a lot more consistently, which is great. For those players that don't throw consistently, I would be saying that's one thing that you've got to do. Consistency of throwing obviously creates a base from which you can work from. But yeah, so the importance of throwing in the franchise world has become increasingly important. I would have said, perhaps 10 years ago, there was that coaches and selectors would have been far more happy to carry a player that you said, look, you've got to hide them in the field because they're unable to throw as well because of an elbow or a shoulder injury. That's not the case anymore. Throwing is a really important element, and there's no real places in the field that you can hide these players. So that's one area where it's evolving really quickly. Batting wise, there's I've worked with a number of players who, due to the changes in the way cricket is evolved in terms of the shot making. There's switch hits and hits that didn't strokes that didn't exist years ago, that players are now practicing in high volumes. They're getting issues around with tendinopathy type related, gripping related issues in their batting. So we're having to manage a lot more of those problems. And then finally, the bowling related ones. Now, typically, again, in the past, I've seen some impingement related type injuries. Sometimes occasionally went to surgery for issues to remove scar tissue or potentially loose bodies. But in recent years, I've seen a couple of high profile players develop stress fracture in and around the elbow. And that, again, that's where Roger van Riet has contributed heavily in the chapter. But it's something that was quite novel. It's both of those players are probably known to, the case is probably known to everyone because they are high profile. But they are players that are bowling at very high speed. And I would definitely say you're unlikely to see a stress fracture in people that can't generate those very high speeds of, getting close to 90 miles an hour, 150 kilometers an hour. But there's something to be aware of. And I think it's important to share depend, no matter where you're working in cricket, whether you're working at grassroots level, more of an amateur level, or at the elite level, you need to be aware of the injury profile that you potentially may see. Other than that, I think have a look at the chapter. Probably the main feature around elbows is we do avoid surgery where possible. Try and manage these as, with conservative means, and that's probably stretching yourself as a physio to understand the game of cricket. So whether it's something technical around their throwing technique, their bowling action, looking at more holistic issues around their mobility, so upper body mobility. If you have issues in that space, quite often the area that it's going to present itself is with elbow pain. So if you've got stiff shoulders, stiff thoracic spine, it's very high likely you might end up with some elbow soreness as a secondary issue. So yeah, on the whole, just be aware that elbow issues are there, and that most of them if you're a physio, you're probably going to fall into your lap, because that's where the bulk of the work's going to be, trying to get these people right. But it's good to know probably the more significant and severe injuries where they can lead to, so you've got an appreciation of it. Otherwise, thank you very much, and yeah, look forward to reading the rest of the book.
Good. Thanks, Ben. You always have wise wisdoms to share. So now we get to the exciting part of the launch, and that is a chance to win a physical copy of the book. Now, electronic copies are nice, but to hold this, isn't it amazing? I almost want to carry it with me, but it's slightly heavy. So I've got a question, and can you locate your chat function? So everybody, put your mouse cursor on your chat, maybe click once to open the chat, because here comes the question. The first one that gets the right answer and get it to appear in the chat will win a physical copy of the book. So afterwards, I'll share my email address, and you can just send me a quick email, and we will make sure that Springer will directly ship the book to your chosen address. Here it comes. You've located the chat. In which country were 2 players struck by lightning in 2003? Jim, it seems like Jim Terwater is the first one to get it right in the West Indies.
Oh, no, it's not West. No, I have to disagree. It's not. West Indies is not a country.
Oh,
You've given us an ambiguous question. I would insist that I would say Jordan has actually no one's got it yet. No one has got it yet. The team was Trinidad, but they were not playing in Trinidad. And Paul has got it now. So it is Jamaica is the answer. I'm pretty sure. I'll go back and double check it, but I'm pretty sure it was in Jamaica, but I'll double check that.
I think based on the information provided on the slide, I need to change my question. In other words, forget about the word location, country, location. Which location was the person struck by lightning? And I think Jim got it straight from the slides, where it was.
Okay, no, fair enough. I think that's a reasonable answer, but
yeah.
that's the second stuff up I've had with my slides. Then I've given everyone the wrong steer, but yeah, I think we don't have if we had Akshay or someone. The problem is that West Indies is in the middle of the night at the moment. So if we had Akshay here and he heard you calling West Indies a country, I think he'd have a seizure or something like that. That'd be just they're very big on that the countries are Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, etc. But
yeah, you are very right. Yes, you are very right. I rephrase the location. The location was the West Indies. Okay, good.
I think I'm happy with your choice of winner anyway.
Okay, good. So Jim, I'm going to put my email address in the chat just now, and then you can send me an email, and we'll make sure that book gets to you. I want to encourage you. We've sent out quite a few posts on social media, between John on Blue Sky and Twitter or X, myself on LinkedIn, Ben on Instagram. If you can, please and you are on those platforms, please go and share those posts. You know, my argument is always, if we are going to spend 1,000 hours on a project, it really needs to be shared widely, and it needs to do what it's supposed to do. In other words, touch the lives of others. And the only way we can do that is to disseminate, because dissemination is the first point of impact. So this is just my gentle request to you to please go and share the word. It may just make somebody else's lives much better. Then the next thing is you will get an email. I've said it earlier, but just a reminder of the 20% discount voucher for everyone who registered for this launch. The recording will be available and it will be sent to you very soon after. Just give us maybe 4 or 5 working days to edit things. I'm sure we are under promising and over delivering here, but the recording will be on its way. And then just a few thank yous to Sophie, Laurie and the IT team, the support team from Oxford Brookes University for making this possible and doing all the groundwork behind the scenes. We really appreciate that. To all the authors that contributed, brilliant work. Thank you very much. Publishers, Springer, they really did a great job in also getting things going and getting us to this point. And to John, of course, thank you very much. And to all the attendees, also thank you very much for being here. I'm going to hand over to John now for a last few final words, and then we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I'll wind it up very quickly because we are over time and it has been a long launch. The launch has gone well, despite my attempts to stuff it up with my poor PowerPoint presentation. But yeah, thanks, Benita, for inviting me. Thanks, Springer, for inviting us. And thank you particularly to all the chapter authors, but also to everyone else who's interested in the book and has come along to listen tonight. We will get the opportunity to do a second edition if this goes well. Actually, I'll give you one extra bit of information, which I learned from Springer, is that books are now like cricket itself, in that it's the TV rights equivalent that makes most of the money. So they don't actually make a lot of money, apparently, from selling physical copies. They make money from the universities paying for subscriptions for the book. So whether the book's a success or not will come down to downloads, and if there are a lot of downloads, then Springer will be invested to ask us to do a second edition and add a few more extra chapters. But if the downloads are weak, then they'll say, look, it was good doing it once off, but we don't think we're going to get much benefit out of it. So posting it to social media increases the reach, the altmetric ratings, etc. If you're writing up a paper yourself over the next couple of years, cite a chapter from Cricket Sports Medicine. Keep the momentum going for more attention to it, because yes, buy a copy of the book, but apparently that's not the motivation to sell physical copies. The amount of access that it has at the university libraries and will actually drive a second edition far more than anything else. And the more attention that the book gets on social media, the more citations that chapters get, the more that people will download it from university libraries, and that will hopefully lead to us being one of the few books that gets invited to have a second edition. And we'd love some extra authors to do some extra chapters on some of the topics we left out. Anyway, thanks very much, Benita. Well done tonight or today. It's night here, but day where you are, and those watching the replay who are waking up in the Caribbean tomorrow.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, cheers. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Goodbye.